Hello, everybody. Drosco here from 10knorm.com, where my main focus is to help guide heart-centered entrepreneurs under 10K months to transcend all of the blind spots that keep them from thinking, feeling, acting, and authentically marketing so they can normalize their own versions of 10K months. And on today's episode, we have another Real Talk segment where I bring in a heart-centered entrepreneur on their way towards their 10K norm. And we have some real talk about what's currently their biggest challenge towards their 10K norm. And in that conversation, we're going to explore who they are, why they do what they do, and then live on the call, I get to help them get out of their own way on a challenge that they're currently experiencing towards their 10K norm. And for today's guest, we have Lisa Strylowski, who is a holistic healer and intuitive nourishment guide, which I love that description. So I'm happy to dive into that further. And what she does is she helps people connect with the innate wisdom that they hold to both heal and thrive from soil to soul, which I also want to get deeper into. So I love these descriptions. And what's interesting about Lisa is that her career began as a registered nurse, and she now embraces the healing arts, integrated nutrition, yoga, Ayurveda, energy healing, and sustainable living to guide individuals toward living a life that is both aligned with their highest expression of self and also their health. So, Lisa, thank you very much for being here and welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I am doing great. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, I mean, you have this like laundry list of things. And I mean, I didn't even get to like your credentials and stuff like that. Like you're a registered nurse, a national board certified health and wellness coach, a yoga instructor with like the, 200 hours of practice and all that, Reiki practitioner, a certified clinical trauma provider. It's just like, a lot about a lot of things related to inner and outer wellness. So I'm curious to know, what's your story and how did you get to where you are?
Yeah, and we'll probably dive into that later as I guess that could be one of my blocks that may come up is how do I even condense down and in a succinct way say what it is I do, because there is a lot there. But I think I'll just start by sharing my story and we'll go from there. So I think it's important to start with, I've always known that the seeds of a healer. I've always been a healer in this lifetime, in previous lifetimes. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, my parents told me I taught myself how to read by picking up like medical pamphlets and reading the medical encyclopedias in the house. Like, we had to take that away from you. You were too young to be looking at that stuff and reading it. I was really excited to go to the doctor and to go to school when I was a kid. Like, I hated summer vacation. I mean, I like summer, but I just wanted to be in wanting to learn and to grow and to change. And I also knew that there was an intuitive part of me, and that was much harder to put into words, especially at that age. And something that I also remember being that age is being that adventurous with my knowledge or intuition or speaking loudly to it. I was silenced a lot. It made people uncomfortable, or it was like, no, that's not how we talk, or what are you talking about? So there became a certain point where I kind of silenced that part of myself, or I, tended to not raise my hand in class. I kind of got the message that when I stepped out and really wildly expressed myself, it made other people uncomfortable. And then that translated into, come time to apply for colleges. My dream was, I wanted to be Clarice Starling. I wanted to be a forensics psychologist. I was just so fascinated with understanding the human psyche and why people think the way they do, feel the way they feel, and how, different people's paths in lives, even living similar lives, could be so vastly different. But what ended up happening is, I think, fear took over, and I was like, oh, doctorate degree, all this, like the money, the time. And I ended up switching my major to nursing. So it was another healing art. It was a career that I enjoyed very much, that I excelled at. I was also very passionate about. And I started my work as an intensive care nurse, and I worked in the ICU, kind of taking care of the sickest of the sick for many years. And in that time, I began to notice some things in my own life and with the people I cared for. I was just seeing a lot of the same patients coming back over and over again, not truly healing and recovering from their chronic illnesses and just living this life that was surviving, and they never really felt great. And it was kind of mirrored in my own life. I kind of chalked it up to, you know, I will tell you, in nursing school and in medical school, nobody teaches you about nutrition. Nobody teaches you the value of sleep hygiene and all these other things. It's just a Band-Aid system, or a disease management system, as I like to say. So I was feeling pretty crappy, you know, working 12-hour shifts, 24-hour shifts, overnights, drinking all the coffee, eating all the fast food. And it began to dawn on me that there was something bigger for the people I wanted to serve, and there was something bigger for myself. And again, it was this hunger of, there's more out there. I need to learn more. I need to grow more. And, you know, and there was a lot of things in my own personal journey. I battled with being overweight. I battled with anxiety, skin issues, some autoimmune things. And then in relationships, you know, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma in my family. And that led me to had 2 marriages and 2 divorces. And that gave me a little bit of a complex. And it was after that second one that I started to turn towards, I started seeing an intuitive healer, and really wanted to turn that focus of understanding why I was feeling, thinking, and doing the things I was doing in my life. How could I feel more well? And so it started with some intuitive healing, opening up that empathic side of me again that I had started to turn off. Started seeing a functional medicine physician and learning about integrative nutrition. And at that point, my world just opened, like blew wide open. I had never felt so alive. I think I looked and felt younger at 35 than I did at 25. I just didn't even know that this life was possible. I thought that was like, oh, that's possible for some people, but like genes, or that's just not me. And another big piece in that story for me was I started taking voice lessons. It was never I wanted to be a professional singer, something I was really passionate about. And it mirrored so many things in my life. Like, one of the biggest things I learned in voice lessons is, yeah, you can match pitch and you have a lovely voice, but I was terrified to just let my voice go and trust it. And this is a big theme. So in doing all these things, stepping into things that I once was maybe fearful for, hesitant of, and every time I conquered one of those fears, feeling more empowered, feeling more alive and more emboldened. It's funny, I was listening to one of your old episodes, I think earlier today, and it talked about the difference between cowardice and courage, and that the fear never changes. I don't think that doing things that are hard or scary ever gets easier. Your brain starts to learn that, okay, I'm going to be safe, I'm going to be okay. And in fact, I'm going to be better if I continue to challenge myself and do these things. So you can fast forward nursing career. I moved from intensive care to working in organ donation, which was another field that some people are like, how could you do that? And, you know, I worked with really holding a space for people in the worst times of their lives and offering them some life in the worst circumstance they could find themselves in. And I often found myself just thrown into these situations where I had to adapt and be compassionate yet strong and caring for all these people. So I gained a lot of gifts from this job as well. And again, over time, I was like, there's still more. There's still more. And then this entrepreneur in me started to build, and I was starting to study more of integrative nutrition. I started pursuing my certification in that and studying more about functional medicine. I also at that time decided, you know, I'd been practicing yoga in my own personal life, and I decided to pursue my teaching certification. So I did an immersive experience where I went to Panama and lived there for a month to do my yoga teacher training. And then that was another big period in my life, whereas I think once I stepped into that awareness of myself, there was no going back after that. And I knew that I had to start taking the steps to become the entrepreneur that I already was. But it started with these baby steps, right? It was like, oh, I need to build my business up. I need to build my website, get it just so that when I make that decision, it's going to be this seamless transfer. And that was never working. It just held me back from what I ultimately wanted to do. Right before the pandemic, actually, in February of 2020, I did leave the corporate or mainstream nursing field and held a job with a mental health practice, working as an integrative nutritionist and counselor. And I learned a whole lot more life lessons there. And it was, again, like, okay, the universe is like, you're taking those baby steps there, but this isn't where you're meant to be. And one of the hardest things that I had to work on in business coaching is, they teach you to define your ideal client or your ideal client avatar. And they want you to get really specific down to an age range of 5 years. What color hair do they have? Where do they go shopping? I hated that exercise. Like, I want to help everybody that wants help. What do you mean I have to narrow it down? And what I learned moving into that job is, like, when you don't do that, you're going to learn very quickly maybe who you're not meant to serve. And that was a big lesson for me in that job. But it also opened a lot about my passion of doing work around trauma healing. And I learned a lot, having worked in the physical health side of things and the mental health side of things, that, there's so many beautiful healing modalities out there. When it comes to trauma, maybe you don't just always have to talk about it all the time. It might not be safe to talk about it all the time. When it comes to health, maybe it's not just let's go talk to somebody when we're feeling like crap, but how can we get ahead of it? And in studying things like Ayurveda, it's like we are so connected to nature, and this is where that soil to soul comes in. We're a mirror of our environment, and if we're not cultivating the external environments that we surround ourselves in, we digest that through our food, through our thoughts, through our emotions. It's all a reflection of one another. So it took it a step further, and it was learning to live in alignment with our circadian rhythms, with the seasons, with our energy flows during the day. And so I spent about a year in that practice, and I was working completely remotely in Chicago, in the city. And I'm a mountain girl at heart, and that'll probably be somewhere I live someday. And I decided, since I'm working remotely, my partner and I picked up and decided to work the first 3 months of the year in different places. We spent a month in Arizona, a couple months in California near Joshua Tree. And I knew still it was like, I'm going to baby step my way out of working for someone else again, and I'll get to this entrepreneur part of me. 5 minutes after getting in that car, I'm like, I'm done. I know this. There's no waiting anymore. When I got to Arizona, I called my boss and put in my resignation. I finished out the month. And so since February of this year, I've been a full-time entrepreneur, which has been one of the most rewarding, exhilarating jumps that I've made in my life, and also the most terrifying. There's been equal moments of I'm on top of the world, and moments of what did I do? Do I have to go get a job tomorrow? So riding all those waves, and I guess that could bring us to where are my blocks today. And I think there's a lot, right? I think many people in entrepreneurship have imposter syndrome. Like, who am I as health coach compared to the 1,000 other health coaches that are out there, or yoga teachers, or, but it all usually for me comes back to that speaking my awesome, being a chameleon and wanting to adapt and, help all the people that want help.
Got it. So it just cut out a little bit near the end there. This is before the chameleon part. So I'm just curious, what is it that you were sharing there?
Okay, so I think I was saying sometimes I do feel like a little bit of a chameleon, in that I need to send a message that would be well received by everybody. And, when I'm writing a post or a blog post, I tend to freeze, and it takes me hours sometimes to write an Instagram post, because I'm writing it this way and I'm thinking about this person who may not understand what I'm saying. And I feel, again, like I'm trying to catch that I want to help everybody.
Got it. Okay. So first and foremost, thank you very much for such a detailed and well thought out, introduction. I'm assuming, because I kind of saw you looking down, like if you're watching the video of this instead of the audio, right? Like you had kind of prepared, I got to say this and I got to say that. It was kind of like that, I would guess that you were a pretty good student in school. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I can see where that piece comes into play. So nothing against that. I totally get it, but it's very evident. So normally when I hear somebody's interpretation or their own intro or what they're adding to the piece that I usually just kind of read through at the beginning, we kind of go into follow-up questions. And with you though, I feel like what's coming up for me is like, why don't you tell me where you want this conversation to go next?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And yes, and we talked at the beginning about like, oh yeah, I was going to have everything prepared and I decided I just need to go with the flow. Oh, they were still written down. I'm like, because something that happens to me sometimes is I want to get it all out and then I have a conversation and I completely miss over like 3 really important things that I really wanted to share with people. So that's why that happened. And it's really funny that you asked me where I want the conversation to go, because I'm like, I could say 8 things. I want him to tell me where he wants the conversation to go.
Yeah, I kind of got that sentiment. So, I know you were unprepared for this aspect of it because I kind of was as well. So, yeah, I'm going to bring it back to you and what resonates most with being brought up right now?
I will say, and yes, that is something that I wrote down earlier, but I don't even have to look down to remember it because it's right here, is that, a lot of things do come back with me expressing my voice authentically. And when I try to drill down to like, why, what does that mean? Why is that so scary? Is that what the message that I get is that when I'm wildly authentically me and I continue to grow, I lose people in my life. And that was evident to me sometimes in, when I'm very authentic with my family, it's not received well. It's, oh, you're acting like you know better. Or I'm feeling like I'm being talked down to 2 divorces, and they both were born of I was continuing to grow, and then it became unsustainable because we weren't growing together. So the internal message that I have, and even with clients, is that when I'm up here but somebody's not ready to be there, if I stay where I'm at and wanting to do the work that I'm deeply passionate about, I'm losing a client.
Got it. Okay. So just as a side note, before I get into your specific bit, for yourself or anybody else that's listening to this, I believe it was episode 11 or 12 with Carrie. She's also a coach, also dealt with a very similar type of narrative internally as well. So if somebody wants to dive deeper in addition to this episode into that, I'm just going to put that out there as a tangent, just goes to that episode. But now getting specifically back with regards to your share. So that's actually like I was kind of jotting things down as you were speaking, and multiple times I jotted things down related to voice or expression. So I can see why that would be coming up. So this sentiment of like, when I'm authentic, I lose people. Like, does that statement itself sound true to you, or would you refine it a bit more to sound truer?
I think maybe one way to refine it, instead of saying that I lose people, is outgrow or grow apart.
Okay. So when I'm authentic, I grow apart from people. Does that sound accurate? Or would
It
you
does.
refine that further?
It feels accurate.
Feels accurate. Okay. And you had also mentioned a few different times, like, okay, so if I'm authentic and I speak to what I'm authentically passionate about, clients will leave. There was a element of like almost ostracization or like pushback from family. If I'm authentic, then they will shun me away. You mentioned the divorces had an element of that as well. So would you say in those instances it also felt like you outgrowing, or does it feel like something else?
It feels like outgrowing. You know, a lot of where some of my reservations and shyness and fear of pursuing things that are difficult definitely is a theme in my family. There's a lot of people in my family that play it very safe or live a, I hate to say small life, like that sounds judgmental, but you know, and for instances with my friends, I can remember having a disagreement with a very, very close friend of mine who I love very dearly. And I sometimes feel that when I open up or possibilities to people, I'm doing it out of earnest and of love and wanting to help. And I was told once by a friend, you know, it's like hearing the worst things that you feel and believe about yourself and having them pointed out to you. I'm like, oh, when I do this, I hurt people. That's certainly not my intention.
So you were sharing what you authentically saw was happening in her dynamic, and what she reflected back was essentially, why are you hurting me with your observations?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay. So would that also fall in line with the outgrow sentiment, or no?
In that specific moment, maybe not so much outgrow of emotional awareness at that point, but what that turns into over the long term is, you know, I'm somebody who doesn't play or live in the surface level. I'm someone who, you know, like there is no bottom to how deep we can go with conversations and things, and that's where I love to live. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and that's where I feel the outgrow. And it's like, okay, if it's a partner or friend, it's like I gotta go here, and if you're still down here over here, I don't want it to be a one above the other, but then we are growing apart.
Got it. Okay. So then when I'm authentic, I make people uncomfortable. Would that be as true or truer than the I outgrow people?
That sounds truer.
Truer. Okay. So when I'm authentic, I make other people uncomfortable. Okay. So are you cool if we kind of dive deeper into that and see where that can lead us?
Absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. So when I'm authentic, I make other people uncomfortable. What does that mean?
I think that means, you know, I like to talk about dismantling the ego to balance it, and those are scary places to go. I believe that some of the most important aspects of our healing are things like shadow work and looking at the parts of ourselves and the parts of humanity that we would either rather not believe exist or it's really difficult to be very open about. And many people don't want to go there.
Got it. So if you look at what that means to you in relation to other people, how would you fill in that blank? So when I'm authentic, I make other people uncomfortable, which means that ...
It means when I'm authentically me, I make other people uncomfortable. And then what comes to mind is like, then I lose people.
Okay, so then I lose people. Okay, so when I'm authentically me, or when I'm authentic, I make other people uncomfortable and then I lose them. Is that really true?
I would say no, that anybody, you know, you do grow apart from people in life, and people who maybe that, you know, life is a cycle with growth, and people who maybe do, not everybody is meant to be in your life as a forever partner, forever friend. You know, in yoga philosophy, there's yamas and niyamas, there's non-attachment, having practicing non-attachment to people's and outcomes. And, and I firmly believe, I could, and maybe I still do have a little bit of complex of, oh, I was divorced twice before the age of 40. And I don't believe that that's a sign of a failure. I think that if a relationship ends, the measure of was it a success or not is, did you grow and change during that period? And the period that you were together, did you make an impact, a positive impact on each other's lives?
Got it. So this sentiment, this thought, this narrative of when I'm authentic, I make other people uncomfortable and I lose them. I've had instances in my life through divorce, through just kind of outgrowing people, different seasons, different people. I have evidence in my life where I've seen that not to be absolutely true. In fact, some things that could have been taken as failures, like, getting divorced twice before 40, I looked at them as, what did I learn from that? So it's actually a benefit to me. So it's like you have the evidence to show that it's not necessarily objectively true, but there's an element of it that feels true. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So then how do you react when you think the thought, when I'm authentically me, I make other people uncomfortable and I lose them?
I mean, I feel it somatically, feel it like in my chest and in my jaw.
Okay. So, and you can go deeper into that. So I feel it somatically, what are the sensations? What are the feelings? How do I act? What do I think? Like, what's the broad reaction of that thought for you?
It's a contraction because, as much as I would like to practice non-attachment and be freely open to people are going to come into and out of my life, maybe some of those people I want to stick around. When it comes to business and clients, really want to help people. Really, what makes me most passionate and lights me up as a healer is, yes, by helping people step into their power, realizing that they are a limitless being and they deserve that life is not just, okay, we go through every day, like we deserve to be totally vibrant and empowered. And the really honoring part of that work for me is being able to hold a container for people to feel safe, to be vulnerable enough to allow that transformation and that work to happen. So when I feel like when I'm authentic, I make people uncomfortable, then I'm not holding that container.
Got it. So if they're uncomfortable, then I don't just feel contracted in myself. I'm actually contracting the container for their expansion. Is that accurate? Okay. And I'm just writing these down. So if you couldn't think that thought, so if you lost the ability to repeat that narrative, when I'm authentically me, I make other people uncomfortable and I lose them, who or what would you be?
I would be this has been my mantra since yoga teacher training, I would be a confident, powerful, and empathic healer who does hold that container for many people.
And more specific, you hold the container for what?
For other people to feel safe to be that vulnerable, wildly authentic version of themselves.
Got it. So if I couldn't think that thought, if I couldn't repeat that narrative, I would be my full, confident, empathic, powerful healer self. And I would be able to hold the container completely, like genuinely, for other people to feel vulnerable and have access to their own healing. Is that all accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So if you looked at that thought, if you looked at that narrative as a projection, okay, that it reflects something back onto me. So when I'm authentically me, or when I'm authentic, I make other people uncomfortable and I lose them. If you had to turn it around as a reflection and replace each I statement with my thinking or my thoughts, how would you restate that statement?
It'd be when my thinking is wildly authentic. My thinking makes me uncomfortable, and I might lose myself.
And does that feel as true or truer than the original statement?
It definitely feels as true, as evidenced by when I talked about when I was younger, and it still happens multiple times a week probably, is when I feel that sting of, ooh, I made somebody uncomfortable, then I shrink, and then I'm not me. And then I do lose myself a little bit. It gets harder to, put those shoes back on, so to speak.
Right. So when I'm thinking authentically, actually, okay, I'm just writing these down. Actually, you know what? If you are watching this on YouTube, you can actually see me doing this live, but the reason I have it is because it pops up so many times. So what I'm actually showing you right now is your statement and the turnaround process. And if anybody's familiar, this is actually like Byron Katie's inquiry. So if your limiting thought was, so when I'm authentically me, I make other people uncomfortable and I lose people. Can you just repeat again how you turn it around? And I'll actually just write them out here so that it's easier for us to follow.
Sure. So when my thinking is authentically me, my thinking makes myself uncomfortable, and I lose myself.
Okay. And you said that piece was as true as the original statement?
Yep.
Okay. Why?
Well, because I do. When I do sometimes take those chances into like not, taking the filter off or the veil. If I feel like I am making someone else uncomfortable, then I in turn feel that uncomfortableness inside of me and that contraction. And then I do tend to lose that very authentic part of myself. I shut it, either it goes offline for a short while or, it's sedated, however.
Got it. So it's when I feel that discomfort, that contraction, there's almost like a fear response that that's what the other person is experiencing. So I shut that part of me down. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you look at the statement, when I'm authentically me, I make other people uncomfortable and I then lose those people, right? So your turnaround was when my thinking is authentically me, my thinking makes myself uncomfortable so that I end up losing myself. Okay. So if you look at that turnaround, there are still aspects where we're talking about my and me. And what's curious to me is that it was the first I aspect of that statement that you turned around to the thinking. Because when I listen to you speak and even reflect back that last piece, it's not actually your authentic self that gets scared of the uncomfortableness. It is actually the thinking and the narrative that triggers that response. So what I would invite you to consider and take it on for size is when I'm authentically me, my thinking makes me uncomfortable and I lose myself.
way more truer. Yes.
All right, so I'm just going to write that down for reference here. So when I'm authentically me, my thinking makes sorry, I forgot it now. I'm trying to jump.
My thinking makes me uncomfortable, right?
And I lose myself.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So your fear of authenticity is not yours, right? It is the narrative, it is the belief that I kept repeating from childhood because it was other people's uncomfortableness that I took as my own. That voice never left. And that's the voice that becomes uncomfortable when you are actually just being yourself, right? It's my ego, it's my thinking, it's my attachment to that story that actually makes my thinking, my ego uncomfortable, because the you of you behind that voice is the confident, empathic, powerful healer. That's not the person, that's not the you that's actually uncomfortable with any of this. But the narrative gets threatened every time that part of you comes up. And it's the thinking of that narrative, the attachment to it, that causes the discomfort. So you end up losing yourself because I stay rooted in this. So how does all of that land for you?
Very deeply, very accurately. And it's also like an excerpt out of The Untethered Soul. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that book. So yes, I agree. So what's coming up for you then, just upon reflection of that?
Yeah. I mean, to just say it in other words or in another language from the book is that, yeah, we are not our minds. We're not our thinking. Who I authentically am is very separate. Who Lisa is not those thoughts. Those are a culmination and they came from my experiences. They came from external sources. It has no bearing on who I actually am as a soul.
100%, right? The suffering is from the attachment to that narrative. And what I think a lot of healers get into is this deep dive into, well, what is the root, what is the root, what is the root, which certainly has its time and place and is a necessary part of it. But at some point, we have to admit that upon waking to something, upon the awareness of, like you obviously understood the root of all of this, right? You said it at the beginning of the call. I always had my voice shut down when I was younger, right? I took voice lessons afterwards, the same thing come up. So like the root of it isn't unknown, but it's the growing up, right? It is where do the ripples of that root show up in my life right now? They're going to show up in the narratives that ultimately feel uncomfortable. So in this instance, it was my relation to others. That thought is happening right now. It's happening every time you want to make an Instagram post, every time you have a sales conversation, every time you talk to a current client. That's where it's showing up. Why? Because the attachment to what happens to my authenticity is still present, right? So it is processes like these, right, which in 10K norm, like we dive into like thought management, self-coaching your way through these things when they do show up, because they're not going to show up in the container of healing. The awareness is 100%. I think you've already done that work, but they're going to show up every time we have the implementation of the next step, the growth into my 10K norm, the stepping up and sharing my authentic piece, the asking for the sale, the saying no to the client that isn't actually ready to do this work. That's where the ripples show up. And that's the aspect of actually growing up. So how does all of that land for you?
Spot on. It's funny, like as we're getting to that very real piece, my voice is getting a little hoarse, and I'm like, this is true.
Yeah. And of course, right, the voice, right, with regards to your throat chakra, like what is going to not want to be seen, what is going to go on alarm, the very piece that allows you to do what you've wanted to do in a lifelong way, which is just speak what you authentically see without filter, without shyness, without the preparatory notes to make sure that everything is exactly as it needs to be, right? So does that piece resonate as well?
Oh yeah.
Perfect. And what's coming up internally for you, somatically or feeling wise?
You know, there is a little bit of like grieving, like, you know, how many more people could I help, or how much more expansive could my life have been if I was able to tackle this earlier? But the coulda, shoulda, woulda, and everything happens as it's meant to happen. And I know that I have a powerful message to share. So even, you know, in one hand you've got the grief, but in the other hand there is this excitement, just like the awareness in and of itself. When you can come back to that awareness is very freeing. You're like, oh yeah, that's not me. So it just takes a little more dedicated work in managing that conversation of, this isn't my stuff, or, you know, not my monkey, not my circus, right? Or not my mind. I don't need to go there.
Absolutely. And so again, there's two things. One is at the end, right, with regards to like, not my monkey, not my circus, etc. I would actually invite you to consider that it is. Because where are those thoughts playing out?
In my life, I mean, in my interactions with my clients, in my attempts to expand my business and to move forward.
Correct. So the original event, the original circus, while it is not yours, it doesn't matter, right? And again, as like I use Byron Kaye's work quite a bit, but she talks about, you know, we have our business, your business, and God's business. Their circus is their circus, but how it manifests in you, whether just by image, whether just by taking mental real estate, whether hijacking narratives that hijack your emotions, that hijack your action, and ultimately reflect back your results, that part is yours. Because that circus doesn't exist outside of you, especially not in this moment. And ultimately, if it didn't affect you in any way, then you would have ignored it. So I would take a step back, and that's more on the ownership piece, but that is how, you know, that ego voice plays with us. The easiest person to lie to is ourselves. No, that's not for me, that's their stuff. True, but is it really useful for what's happening in your life right now? If the answer is no, I'm going to look at, well, okay, how does that piece actually impact us right now? So before I go forward, how does that land for you?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. You know, whether it's with this or anything else, we can't pretend the ego doesn't exist and there's no magic switch to like turn it off. And that's the key to enlightenment, right? It's learning how to live in relation to the ego.
Yeah, I wish that was the case. This would be a whole lot faster and a whole lot easier. So yeah, I wish that was the case too. The second part that I wanted to reflect back to you is when I was prompting you to go through the inquiry and look at, essentially meditate on that original thought. One of the things that kept coming up for you was, okay, so if I'm making people uncomfortable, then I contract the space for them to do their own healing. If people leave, then I can't impact as many people. So if you were to turn that around, what might that turnaround be?
Okay. Can you reflect that statement one more time?
Sure. So a lot of your statements were, okay, so I make other people uncomfortable. I deny them the space to actually heal. You know, I wish I didn't have to make them uncomfortable because then they could heal. If you were to turn around those statements in general, what would they be?
Yep. So when I'm allowing myself to become uncomfortable by my thinking and I contract, I'm actually the one that's contracting the space for my client, whether it's I don't show up to offer authentically, or it's just resonating, that frequency is emitting from me in a palpable way that then results in maybe the client not feeling safe enough to share or to go there.
Yep. And when you contract that space, are you also contracting it for yourself?
Mm-hmm. Usually so.
Right. So it's not that you're contracting and eliminating space for clients to do healing. It's you're contracting and eliminating space for you to do your own healing.
Yeah.
How does that one land?
Oh, I mean, my ego wants to be like, no, that's not true. I do my healing all the time. But the fact is, here we go again. I know that, as passionate I am about my own healing, this has obviously been one block that's been really hard to take it to that next level. I can have the awareness and work on it here and there, but it's almost like those baby steps I was taking in a job. It's like, I'll just put my toe to the edge, but it's that execution of getting to the other side or breaking free from it in execution that needs some more attention and some more work.
Right. Because as long as that part perpetuates, nothing actually needs to change because the story is true, right? Mm-hmm. As long as it's about the suffering because I can't provide the space for others, that distracts from creating the space for me to go through the things that I wish I could heal for others, right? So we're in other people's business while neglecting our own. That is what allows the ego to do what it ultimately wants to do, which is stay alive, which is to perpetuate. And the only way to perpetuate is to spin you around the very thing that's going to keep that default continuing. Because expansion beyond that, being your authentic self, right, as we described in the initial statement, that is a major threat, not to the deeper, fuller you, but to that story and that narrative. So as long as I can keep you and your focus towards what you're not doing for others, that keeps it from not doing it to myself, which means that part of me gets to stay alive.
Yep.
So what's happening internally as you kind of hear that piece?
The nutritionist in me is like, oh, like I put things in analogies. I'm going, yes, this is just like when you have gut dysbiosis and you have to starve out the bad bacteria, you're going to get really cranky and it's going to almost make you crave these things even more strongly because they want to survive and thrive. They don't want to be killed off. And that's the same thing you need to do with this narrative.
Yeah, that's actually a great analogy of it, because it is working that way, right? Like those narratives only stay alive in a in a parasitic type of way, right? It's not really the things that serve you, narratives that serve you, that's symbiotic. The distortion of that is the parasitic aspect of it. So yeah, 100% I agree with that. And just to kind of bring it back then to, oh, are you able to hear me now? Okay, so we have some technical difficulties. Okay, so we had a little bit of technical, difficulties, so a little intermission. But what I was going to say was, if we now bring it all back together, right? Like we have this awareness, we see where the thought is showing up in those ripples. If you now had to connect that back to your current position towards your idea of what a 10K norm is, whether it's actual 10K, more or less, whatever, right? Towards your vision of where you want your business to go, how do you see that part affecting you?
in terms of what maybe needs to happen to break through towards achieving that is, maybe even sharing my story with my clients, with my audience, a little more authentically, a little more boldly. Something I've had a tendency to do is make it very buttoned up and a little bit real, but not too much. And all those times I sit there and look at an Instagram post and either not finish it because I think it's silly, or I think other people will think it's silly. That next newsletter, being more off the cuff, more authentic.
Got it. So one part of it is I can show up more authentically. I can make my mess my message. And I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's kind of like a ripple effect there as well of the amount of energy it takes to just send one thing, or the amount of energy I get to hemorrhage with all these looping considerations is also less. So I'll have more capacity to actually do those things. Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
And how do you think all of those things would lead more towards your 10K norm?
I think my voice would actually reach more of the clients that want to work with me and that I want to work with. There is a lot more about, right now, I think in that playing it safe in my business, I do the coaching, and, yoga and Reiki will forever be a part of that, and sustainable living. I also have a small food business, and that's like, I'm doing all of the things at 10 or 20% versus doing the really heart of the work that really matters to me, and opening that up to things that I want to do, like retreats and adventure therapy, things that my ego would tell me, can't do that right now. You're not ready for that.
Got it. So there's not just the authenticity, not like having more bandwidth to actually put that message out there. Also then attracting the people I truly want to work with, because my message is more authentic. My clarity on who I want to work with is there, because I don't have to doubt. I'm not hemorrhaging the capacity and the energy. I can discern and say yes or no to the people that are actually a true match. And then further down that hemorrhaging aspect, there's also I'm not going to dilute all of my attentions so that I can appear busy, but actually focus on the 1 to 2 things that not only am I passionate about, but will actually move the needle forward towards my 10K norm. So would all of that be accurate?
Yeah, definitely.
And how is that realization or that awareness actually affecting you day to day?
Day to day, or I mean, in this moment, embracing that awareness, I just felt my capacity increase, like, hugely.
Right. Because it's like, if I'm not spending 50-60% of my time hemorrhaging it to things not aligned with me, to the people not aligned with me, to the looping, doom loops in my head surrounding what should I share, who should I share, who am I going to have issues with if I do share authentically, that capacity now opens up to be reallocated towards the things that you actually want.
Mm-hmm.
And if you weren't going to change, if you weren't going to address those things, what do you think is going to happen?
Oh, I'll live in this loop for a long time, and then it'll just be reaffirming anything the ego says about you're doomed. There's going to be scarcity. You can't do a business all on your own. I mean, that voice, that muscle just gets bigger and stronger.
Yeah. So it's like, not only do I then provide evidence for the stories I'm attached to, but I prolong and increase the momentum of those stories, basically creating a bigger hill to climb than if I began to handle all those ripples at once. So does that part feel accurate?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, I think in your instance, what's standing in the way of kind of closing that gap towards however you would define your 10K norm is less about the specific tactics, right? It's less about, okay, how do I structure a post? What am I going to talk about? How can I create the content? What can I offer to people? And we didn't really get into like the worthiness and pricing packaging aspect, but potentially that as well. But even in that space, if it is an issue, it's what is happening internally with me right now. In general, from what I've seen, it's the narratives that are looping right now that I'm attached to that are constantly pressing the gas and hemorrhaging my capacity, energy, and inspiration, while simultaneously trying to press the gas and actually move forward to what I want. So how does all of that land for you?
Yeah, that's really well put. And that, as hard as I'm trying to push forward, the drag back is about equal, and that does get exhausting and will lead to burnout.
Correct. Like even if you didn't add much of anything else, but you just took your foot off the brake, from the thoughts to the focus to the energetic leakages, that's going to propel you forward way more than adding of, I'll start a podcast, or I'll do videos, or, whatever other things that part of you is going to loop. I think is going to take you way further than, like it's a subtraction is going to take you further than the addition.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you say that, and also really interesting the timing as to how we connected on Matchmaker FM, because in terms of content, I've done some of this and so much of this in business coaching is, how do you want to connect with your audience? Is it a newsletter? Is it an Instagram post? And I just felt like those were the smartest ways or the easiest ways. But writing is actually much difficult for me because it's so much easier to hide in writing. And I've always thought about, I kind of want to do a podcast. But again, it is that, but you don't speak your voice very well. And so it's been something that I've thought a lot about, and where I'm going to do a series of illuminating other light workers and showing people and that there are so many beautiful ways to pursue healing and self-growth. And doing my first one this week, I decided, I was on the phone, I got connected with someone and just blurted it out and offered it. And I was like, why did you do that? And knowing that it's aligned, and this is the way I need to start speaking my voice. So
love it. I mean, you couldn't have asked for better timing.
yeah.
So yeah, definitely that resonates with me, and that's one of the reasons why, with the clients that I work with in a 10K norm program in general, like when we do get to the marketing aspect, like I always say, like I'm very marketing agnostic, and it's for the reason you just mentioned, which is if you either don't like to, let's just say in this instance, write, or as you pointed out, that is a distortion of hiding, then we want to move towards the aspect of you that lights up, that also ends up lining up with marketing. So if I light up by being on video, if I light up by speaking my truth, if it's the energy and the nuances in my voice and my expression that people actually connect with, I would be doing you a disservice, or whatever the program would be doing a disservice, if we're making you, okay, like go and write posts. Like that might be a component of what you end up doing, but it's how can we make the marketing not feel like work? How can it be as fun as the actual craft that you practice? Okay, that's not as simple as saying, the 10 best ways to write a blog post, or whatever other kind of, like you said, head and intellectual things we need to do. Those are necessary and required when you already are clear on what you want to do, and you've done the work to, like, you've created the evidence that you can show, I'm showing up in this way, now we need to refine it. That's when the tactics begin to make sense, and they actually begin to skyrocket your efforts, because at that point you're just refining something that's already natural. You're actually getting better at delivering the thing that you are excited with delivering to begin with. So I think that's a great example that you came to naturally, where it's like, this is where I feel like I want to blossom. Yes, it's scary, but that's also part of my journey, right? That's why we go into the emotional management, the thought management, learning how to self-coach your way through the way that I just, facilitated for you, because that's going to come up the first 10, 20, 30 iterations that I do that thing. After that, it'll be normal and I have a new baseline. Great. But we got to get to those initial 10, 20, whatever reps of doing your thing. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that, because that comes up all the time, right? So how does all of that land for you?
Yeah. You can't, the self-coaching and the self-talk is so important, because we can't talk ourselves into being an expert. Like, we need to coach ourselves through working through the discomfort, working through the fears to actually do the thing. You can't plan it out and one day be an expert podcast host or an expert this. You have to go do the thing.
100%. And again, beautifully said. And just another tangent and teaching point here, which is, when we go through like our focus section, there's this element of the 4 C's. And this is something that I borrowed from a business coach, Dan Sullivan. You can actually Google this. He has like a whole ebook you can download for free on the 4 C's that specifically talks about what you just mentioned, which is, well, I can kind of think my way through becoming an expert on something, but that's not really authentic. Like, I don't really have the confidence to execute at the level that I need to execute on this. So when he talks about the 4 C's, he always talks about, like, okay, if I want to have confidence for something, there's kind of 2 elements that need to go into making that confidence. So one element is the actual competence bit. Like, you don't have to, convince yourself that you know how to walk. Like, you know how to walk because you're seeing the competence of it through many, many repetitions of it, right? And then the other part is the belief. So like, when and how do they actually come into play? So the 4 C's is, we always think we need confidence before the competence, but it's actually the reverse. And the other part of it too is, to get confident at something, it first starts with commitment. So making the decision that I'm going to be good at this, or let's just say in your instance, like, I'm going to commit to showing up in a way that's scary so I can self-coach and work through the stuff that's in the way, because I want to be free of that. Okay. And then I can work on the actual craft. So the first part is the commitment, but the next part isn't the competence and the practice, it's actually courage. And oftentimes we think, I need the confidence to have the courage to actually execute. But like you said at the beginning, through what you listened to before, the courage is needed at the time of the fear. You don't get courage before the fear. You get courage at the time of the fear, so you can execute and have the competence, or build up the competence, to eventually get that genuine confidence that you mentioned with regards to the podcasting. So why I bring that up is the belief aspect and the working on self and the self-coaching goes along the 2nd and 3rd C, right? So the courage and the competence. I need to refine my beliefs. I need to refine my narratives. I need to clear them up. I need to self-coach my way through it. I need to manage the emotions that come up while I'm continuing to exercise enough courage to get enough competence to ultimately get the confidence in the thing that I want to do. So I know it's a bit of an esoteric description of what you're describing, but that's really the path that you and others listening are going to be following as they take on this new venture. Because it's not necessarily the novelty that scares you. It's, as we've identified in your earlier instance, it is the narrative I have, whether it was generated through, a long time childhood thing, or it's the ripples of it, or it's something I picked up last week doesn't really matter because it's happening right now. So it is in that space that we get to execute those 4Cs and really begin to move forward on the 1 or 2 things that are going to move us to where it is that we want to go. So I know that was a little bit of kind of a tangent, but how does all of that land for you?
I loved hearing it reflected back, and it's just a reminder we're often so anxious to get from cowardice to courageousness, or this, we just want the pain to be gone and to feel successful, to feel empowered. But there's so much beauty in being present in that process, because that's when you're actually witnessing the growth and the change happen. And like, just the way that you delivered that message made me, even in my mind and my body, slow down and feel what that could be like. And that was really great to hear. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And yeah, you're hearing the ultimate message, which is when people talk about, okay, I should be process oriented, it's about the journey, not the destination. That's effectively what they mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having enough courage consistently and knowing what you need to manage your emotions, to manage your thoughts, to self-coach your way through it, to stay focused long enough on all of those inner aspects through all of the iterations that you're going to need to gain the competence that's going to give you the full confidence in what you do. And the amount of reps you're going to need for that is different for every person, just like the things you're going to have to work through are different for every person, which I think is also why there's such a prevalence of people buying courses, doing work, doing coaching that doesn't get them the end result because it doesn't account for the individuality aspect and the principle aspect of, I got to gain clarity first, not just on what I want and why, but also what are the pieces standing in my way, as evidenced by I know what I should do, but I'm not doing it, overcoming that. And then we can actually use the stuff, the information, to tweak it. And I think that's where you get that connection between, it's not the information, it's the transformation we're looking for. But that ultimately is at the heart of, why I'm doing this podcast this way and showing the realness of what's going on and why the program is structured as is. So thank you for reflecting that back to me, because it is also an affirmation of where I'm going with this and its neediness. So thank you for that from my perspective.
Yeah.
So in that regards, does this feel complete for you, or is there still anything that's kind of lingering?
Feels pretty complete.
Awesome. Well, in that case, I want to switch it back to you and give you the floor to just tell everybody, what you do, how they can reach you, who you work with. Floor is absolutely yours for that whole piece.
Sure. So just to bring it back again, my name is Lisa Strylowski, and the name of my business is Wander Woman Wellness. So you can find me at my website, which is wanderwomanwellness.com. I'm also on Instagram at that same handle, Wander Woman Wellness. So I do private and group intuitive healing and coaching. Jasko mentioned earlier that I am an intuitive nourishment guide, and I much prefer that term, guide, even rather than coach, because as we mentioned, I believe that we all have what we need within us to be our own healers, and I'm honored to provide guidance to help you uncover that and to step into that. And when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to your overall health, all of it is very individualized. So, Reiki may be important in your journey, yoga may be important in your journey. I also talk a lot about sustainability when we talked about the soil to soul. It's a lot of what I work with is tapping back into your natural rhythms. I feel like we've gotten to a place in our modern society where we have forgotten that we really do know how to eat and move our bodies and care for ourselves. We just get in our own way. So more than happy to pick up that conversation with anybody who's willing. And thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the coaching and the guidance you've provided. It really means a lot. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for being on, because I couldn't do what I do if I didn't have volunteers to do it. So I appreciate you stepping up to be that beacon. And yeah, this is definitely like an episode that I think is going to resonate with a lot of people, because it does come up so often. So thank you for, there you go, holding that space for others to see themselves in your story. And yeah, we'll have all those details in the show notes. Yeah, definitely for who it's for to reach out to Lisa. And that's it for today. And we'll see everybody on the next one.